Hello, everyone. Welcome to While the Ghostlight Burns. This is Sarah Lynn Holt. I'm the artistic director here at RS Theatrics, your host for the evening. If you're not familiar with RS, we are a small professional theater company in St. Louis operating out of the Kransberg Arts Foundation. Our mission is to produce shows that have never been professionally produced in the St. Louis metro area before, with the goal of adding new viewpoints and ideas to important conversations in our community. Obviously, there's not a whole lot of adding ideas on a physical stage going on right now. So we decided we wanted to keep those ideas churning, those conversations going in the meantime. And that brings us to While the Ghostlight Burns. We're talking to St. Louis theater artists from many different aspects of theatrical work. And today, our guest is Tress Kurzym. Tress has worked as a theater educator for over 20 years, initially in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at First Stage Theater and Milwaukee Repertory Theater, and then at the Alley Theater in Houston, Texas. It was in these theaters that she was able to teach in-school residencies, run production talkbacks, and serve as an assistant director. As a Texas theater educator for secondary schools, Tress frequently presented for the University Interscholastic League, the Texas Educational Theater Association, and Texas Thespian Festival. Since moving to Illinois in 2014, she has continued to work with theater education, most notably founding and operating her business StagePlay Learning, which is a company based on the concept of using theater skills as life skills. Tress is the theater education coordinator and an instructor at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Tress has also been serving as an intimacy choreographer and director since before there was a name for it, creating and using her own codex for her secondary students to safely tell stories. She started to consult for colleagues and professional productions. She is still learning, studying, and growing in this new craft and adjusting her codex as needed, as well as working toward a certification as an intimacy director. Please join me in welcoming to While the Ghostlight Burns, Tress Kurzym.
Hello. Hi.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
I am too. This is a subject that I got really interested in since it's sort of exploded on the scene as a topic of conversation in theater. Probably now longer ago than I think it was.
Yeah. Time.
What is time? But I love talking about this, and I'm really excited to see your thoughts on some of these things, because I've been thinking a lot about what intimacy means right now when we talk like this instead of this. But before we delve deep into those subjects, I just want to get a little better idea of what shape being a working artist takes for you. How does that look in your life?
Yeah, well, that is a very fluid question for me also, especially right now, as it is with so many other people. Right now, I would say that each day as an instructor at SIUE, that's a large part of my life right now. Overseeing the theater education program. On top of that, I am constantly looking for new ideas for my business with stage play and teaching kiddos that are pre-K to 8th graders, and how to take those lessons and transform them to a Zoom format for my SIUE students that I teach intro to acting to as well. But also my younger students. I also am navigating being a parent during this time and remote learning with my own students. So that takes up a lot of space during the day as well. And so some of the things that I could maybe get done in the day are now getting pushed later and later into the evening, like so many other working parents. So. It can be a little bit of anything. Like tomorrow, I will be doing a corporate training for a rehab facility in Granite City. And then I will be turning that Zoom off and going and teaching 2 classes at SIUE. And then I will most likely be having a production meeting with someone that I'm working on a project for SIUE with for next semester. And a colleague of mine, my creative partner, Emily, and I will be working on a children's show that we're doing at the same time. So it's just different hats, but it's all the same. It's just a different audience sometimes.
And SIUE in particular, there's been a lot that is still happening in that theater department, and a lot that has to shift very quickly based on whatever's happening with regulations and safety measures and things. It sounds like just that alone could have been keeping you busy for months now.
Yeah, my colleagues, certainly. My colleagues have been incredibly busy and incredibly devoted to our students and the community that we serve. And very committed to the students, especially knowing that we couldn't just say, well, guys, I guess we're not going to have much of a season, or we're going to just do our season halfway. And all summer, led by our chair, we were able to meet as a faculty and staff and brainstorm and figure out what we were going to do. And then all of that would change, and then figure it out again. And we're already thinking about next year as well and what that looks like. So I feel very, 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 very grateful to be working with the people that I'm working with. So yeah, for sure. And the students that we get to work with.
So to start, I want to give people a little bit of an idea of your philosophy when it comes to intimacy direction, because I know when I first encountered your work with it, I had read some articles, and that's about the extent of my experience with this as a focused discipline. And from that, I had sort of just taken it as very similar to fight choreography, where you would call in your intimacy director for this scene, and they would tell people how and what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Very specifically, but in taking a workshop with you, I learned that your approach is so much more holistic when it comes to the production as a whole and the cast as a whole. Can you talk a little bit about your process?
Sure. I think, yes, to what you said, I think it is very holistic, but I think that was out of a need to be the director and the intimacy director when I first started working and figuring out what this was and creating my own sort of system for what I needed to be able to do. So I guess to be able to talk about it, I maybe kind of need to go back. Is that okay a little bit and sort of explain? Yeah. So when I first started teaching, even back a little more maybe. As a student, right, we all have sort of horror stories, either as a student or a professional, that impacted us and made us think, this is not good. I don't like this. There has to be something else than this. Or we've witnessed things that made us uncomfortable, varying degrees. So when I started teaching high school theater, I was at a high school that, you have to deal with the high school kiss, right? Like at some point in every high school play, it feels like there's the kiss. And it's really horrible and awkward. And I knew there had to be a better way. And so because I had worked a lot with a director as a student who really focused on ensemble work and movement and not just table work and now we're blocking, but the ensemble movement was such a large part of what we did. So that everyone felt comfortable to touch and move together. I started to teach that to my students on the whole. And then it became very much about teaching them about boundaries and how do we demonstrate where our boundaries are. And then how do we do these exercises where we're discovering touch that could just be me grabbing your arm, but I know that it's safe to do that. And then at what level? So many of my students didn't have any experience with intimacy. You know, what is intimacy when you're in high school, right? Like it's whatever Beverly Hills 90210 is, you know, showing you or what at the time, right? Whatever they're watching on television is that's what they think is this romantic language. And to me, what I was often doing, it wasn't even intimacy with sexuality, it was intimacy with a mother and daughter on stage. And how do I make that believable? Because if I said to the girl that I was directing, oh, I need you to, you know, treat each other like a mother and daughter would treat each other. Well, what does that mean? You know? And so through that kind of discussion, I realized they don't know. And so, but they did understand shape, and they understood movement, and they understood dance. And so I started to choreograph it in a way that they had their intention and they talked about it, and we could look at pictures that I had on the wall for characters and different things like that and say, which of these would you feel more comfortable with? What do you think tenderness looks like for this mother and daughter? And they could touch the ones that they felt most comfortable with. And then I could help them find that space. And then it became through adjustment. And then I started to use all of these other tools that I had sort of figured out and was figuring out along the way, and would be showing my work at different festivals and things, and then started judging other high schools and giving them tips. And then I started to realize, oh, this is a thing. And so people started to call me to help me have them help them fix some of the issues that they were having. So that's sort of how I found myself in it. And then I developed my own practices, which we can talk about in more detail. But it really kind of came out of just a need to make sure that these kids were safe, you know? And especially a parent told me once that it was at a school where the students really were very intelligent and they wanted really smart work, new work, you know? And that often came with, if we were going to do these shows, we had to do them well. And a parent told me once that I guess another parent was upset about some of the content at one point. And the other parent who she had 2 children said, well, I feel like I'm really glad because my daughter is now at university studying, and she knew how to handle some of these scenes at the university level because Tress had taught her, you know, hey, can we do this instead? Can we try this first before we do that, you know, and kind of walked it backwards, and she had a voice and knew what to say and how to use it at that level. And I feel like from an educator standpoint, what I'm doing now is so important because I'm teaching future teachers. And so that's where the industry will really change and shift, is in this reform from that. And so even with my little stage play people, you know, doing Augusto Boal techniques and using shape and sculpture and asking, may I touch you? And if they don't feel comfortable touching, that they can show the shape that they want them to make and things like that. And so they learn consent at a very early age.
It's when I think to my training as a director, there was certainly a lot of talk about semiotics and stage pictures and what body language tells your audience, but there was not a large amount about how to actually work with actors in a way that took them into account, not just what you need from them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it's such an exciting, it shouldn't be an exciting new way to think of it. Like actors aren't just puppets for me.
Right.
Always. But I realized that's why that those things were the hardest things for me to do, because I just really hadn't been given any tools for how to do anything other than dictate.
So that's an interesting topic right there, because if you think about like the first directors were were German, right? Like the very first directors. And so we think about that prompt book and writing down everything and pre-blocking it. I mean, that's how a lot of my directors were, and with my directing training also. And everybody was told where to go, where to pick up the apple, where to bite it. And that's how we were trained. And it was when I went and studied abroad that I worked with directors who were not like that at all, and sort of eschewed that when I brought that into, we were observed as directors and working and moving, and I brought out my little page in my script and had everything like a good stage manager written out as the director of what I envisioned. And they said, what are you doing? And I said, well, and they said, the stage manager does that after you guys said it. And I was like, well, I said it. And they said, well, maybe you need to make this a little more of an ensemble idea. And so that's sort of where I focused more on process and the actors. And then for sure, just that safety and figuring out what do we need to do and how long do we need to take to do it.
My senior directing play might have been a German expressionist play from 1919. Yeah, that might be where my training aligns. But I think I don't want to like give away all of your techniques or anything.
Yeah, I will. I'll give them all away. Yeah.
The one thing that when I've talked about, because I have talked about intimacy training in general, and I've talked about, we've talked about working together when RS goes back on stage. I've brought it up and some people are not familiar with you. And so I've tried to describe a little bit of what your work is. And the thing I keep coming back to as a good illustration of what impressed me and what made me want to bring this into what I'm doing is the exercise where you do the body scan and have the actors notice things about each other and then integrate that rather than trying to dictate from the top down. This is what an intimate gesture will be, that it then grows out of what the actor has internalized already.
Yeah. So, and again, that sort of came out of trying to find believable movement with secondary students, right? With these sort of high school students. And when as a beginning director with them saying, you know, you guys like each other and things like that. And so you get this sort of, and I think to myself, at no point have I ever taken my partner's hands and done this to them, but they're uncomfortable. And so, so what we often do, and what you're describing, is we start with Boal's technique of fences. So when we're warming up that day, because I always start every class and every rehearsal with a warm up where we're in a circle and we're stretching, and I have them say if they have any fences. And so fences is just a really good visible training. And so this is from Boal's book, but TIE, Theatrical Intimacy Education, uses the same concept. And so I think that's why, and we can talk about them later and how I think they're so great of a resource. And maybe because I would recognize some of my own, like, oh, I'm doing this. Oh, this is even smarter than what I'm doing. This is great. So they have fences. So sometimes it can be like when you're a student at that age, it could be, please don't touch my face. And that's one of the things that a high school director will say for intimacy is touch their face. Well, they're dealing with acne and different things like that. And so to ask somebody to touch their face, it's just not good. And so asking them where their boundaries are to start with. And so we'll go through that and they'll say, I don't really want anybody to touch me here, right? Or here, down at my pelvic area. Okay, so we do the fences and they just sort of say it. And then they partner up in a circle, like an outer circle and an inner circle. And the first thing that we do is I say, okay, say your fences to your partner. If you're inside the circle, you're A. B, tell your partner your fences. And then they repeat it to each other. And so she'll say, everything is good here. Please do not touch here. This is a fence. And then the other person will say, what I saw was that this is a fence. And that way they get a chance to see before they do anything. But here's the deal. I added that step of the body scan for two reasons. One, for them to notice, but two, because I might say to you, because I'm a 16 or 17-year-old theater student or a freshman theater major, and it's okay to touch me anywhere. And then all of a sudden, when someone's just not touching you, but so close to you, and you feel that energy, and they start to come here, and depending on who your partner is, you're like, yeah, I said they could touch there. I don't think I want them to. It's another chance. So we do the body scan, and then I say, adjust your fences if you need to. And then they'll adjust. And then we sometimes will do it again, different times. And then another time in the room, we'll do that when I want them to notice specific things about them, like if their hair is curly. Because the other thing is understanding who your partner is. And I'll do this for costume parade day, right? When they get their costumes for the first time, they'll body scan, because all of a sudden there's a tie that we can use in a scene in a fun way, or an earring. There might be something personal, like to find the eyebrow that they see a little scar right there, and they've noticed it, so that when they're in that scene with them and we're playing with shape, that they're really seeing that. And it doesn't always read maybe from the audience, but it's a moment of intimacy that these two people have created. And again, it's not just about partners in terms of like romantic intimacy, although that's a large part of it, especially with the work I do with more complicated work and older work. But with my younger students, it was really just about finding moms and daughters and grandmas, and those sort of relationships you have being more believable and more rounded.
It's a way to add color to those relationships. Mm-hmm. It short circuits the need to have years and years of living together.
Right. Yeah. And I actually got that body scan when I was at the UK from a director of mine who was working with Mike Lee at the time. And so Mike Lee, from his stage and film work, if you've ever read about the work that he's done or studied him, he creates this whole history with his ensemble. And some of it was not something I could do or would do even now with what we know in terms of best practices. But that was something I could take away from it, I felt like.
So when you're looking at this, not from the point of view of the person responsible for the staging, but maybe as a producer who knows that your work is going to involve some form of physical intimacy, or the actor coming into a production, how do people need to be thinking about that given the stage that we are in with this field developing. And just for simplicity's sake, let's pretend COVID doesn't exist.
Right.
We're thinking about when a show would go up as we would expect it to in normal times.
Okay, so in normal times, I would say that if you are the producer and that is, that's going to be part of the season, that you probably want to immediately talk to the director and ask if they have any sort of intimacy training, or if there's anyone on their staff that does. And you're looking for scenes of, ideally, an intimacy choreographer, again, could be there for anything, or a director could be there for anything. But if there are explicit scenes of sexuality, of nudity, of violence, or sexual aggressive violence, then those have to be discussed ahead of time. The next step would be the audition form, because there's been so many times where I think an actor has felt a gotcha or a oops. They didn't know what they were auditioning for, especially with newer work. And they've gone in and there hasn't been any sort of indication that they might have to be in their bra and panties, or that they might have to be nude on stage. And they're sort of discovering this in a read-through because it's a newer work. And actors are trained to say yes, and so they don't want to be difficult. They don't want to, upset anyone. And so having that sort of very descriptive, very specific information on not just the audition form, but in the any kind of web, notice that you have, or any of the notices that you have about the auditions, in the sides. And then I think also one of the things that I hear a lot is actors feeling frustrated because they'll go to an audition and be paired up, and two people will do the kiss in the audition, and they don't feel comfortable with their partner to do the kiss. And so as the intimacy director, or if you are just the director or the producer, making sure that the stage manager or someone says, we're going to use placeholders for that, or stop at the kiss, play the intention and move on. Nobody should kiss today. We haven't done that safely, or talked about it, because no matter what, if somebody does it in the audition, the other people feel like they have to. So that's even pre-casting, right? And then figuring out if there's room in a budget. I think that there are best practices out there that if you cannot afford someone, this is so important to so many people right now, that there are people who will talk to you about it. There are people who will answer questions and give you ideas, so that you're not going in completely blind to that. You should definitely reach out if you just absolutely can't afford it. But I don't know anybody who's working in the industry right now that would not help, at the very least, through phone calls and texts and ideas for how to best do that. And then the other thing that people sort of forget about for intimacy, if there's nudity and different things like that, are the other actors who maybe, so let's say you block it, everything's done safely, but there are these other actors who are still a part of that room, or the staff, at the table, right? And so if somebody is very comfortable with their nudity, and walking around when the scene is not going on, that's not okay, and also the audience might be uncomfortable. And so what does that mean for the audience in terms of triggering? That brings up a whole different discussion of your audience, and allowing an opportunity for them to know ahead of time also.
I think there's also an opportunity there in this larger discussion of intimacy directors being brought into productions, that if you see as an audience member that there is someone in that role, it does offer that little bit of reassurance in that, even if it's just in the back of your mind when you're watching those scenes, particularly if it's something where you're getting into sexual violence, where otherwise you might really worry about that actor. If you know that that's something the production has paid enough attention to, that there's somebody credited as the intimacy choreographer or intimacy director, then yes, everyone's human and maybe it's still not okay, but it at least offers you the opportunity to say they thought about this and they're trying to do everything right. So
that's a great example, Sarah, because, you know, when we talk about, like, in my acting classes or my lecture classes for like a theater appreciation, we talk about the causes of laughter, right? And protection is one of them. And so when you're watching these shows that are hilarious, where somebody's falling and doing this, you know that they're safe because they've had a stunt coordinator. It's not really that person, so you can laugh. But for years, we absolutely didn't know that that was what was happening. And then we would read these stories years afterwards, sometimes, about the abuse that happened physically, emotionally, to these actors. And so we do worry, and there's a good reason to worry. Yeah, that's a good point.
I started thinking down that lane because I read a script some time ago that involved child molestation. I won't get into any more detail of it. But the actor, it said specifically, should be played by someone who is an actual child, because the playwright strongly believed that that would remove the concern that you were going to see something in front of you acted out. Because if it's a child, we wouldn't do that to them. I thought, well, I really hope so. Sadly,
yeah.
We
depends on whose hand it got into. Yeah.
But it got me thinking about that, how what sort of even subconscious expectations can shape our experience as an audience without even knowing it.
That's and that's an interesting thing. Like, as we kind of are in Zoom, and I might be jumping ahead too, but like what it means to be in this digital world with intimacy too, when we're watching, when we're doing the productions in our own home, and when we are watching the productions in a digital space in our own home. It's a whole different level of intimacy that's not even intentional, that we then have to deal with too.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about, let's talk first about virtual productions.
Okay.
Is there a space for this form of intimacy direction? Does it take a different shape?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there is really, I've been thinking a lot about it because I haven't had a chance to do anything with it yet. So let me just say, if anybody's out there and I have some ideas, I have some thoughts, I think that there's all kinds of really cool stuff that you can do, right? I think, first of all, we're probably going to start seeing a lot of writers who write for it in this space, and writers who write really intimate moments that are like Zoom sex or FaceTime sex on stage, with their partner. And so obviously that needs to have somebody there, because you still have boundaries. Even though you're not going to touch one another, the rules of the rehearsal room in terms of keeping it professional, not using sexually charged language. Oh, hello.
Intimacy.
My intimate moment. Sexually charged language in your kind of just joking around, because we have, there's a history of that in the rehearsal space that can, again, make people really uncomfortable. And it would never be allowed in any other workspace. But we've allowed it for far too long in our rehearsal spaces. And so eliminating that is a good thing. So those sort of best practices of that, but then making sure that people understand that when we're doing the staging of this, that it is still staged. And so there is your intended destination and your actual destination is what theatrical intimacy education uses those two terms. And that's the idea of like, if I am simulating masturbation on stage, I'm not, even though you can't see me, down here, that there is sort of this idea of where would I touch myself, and then where on my body is it's that kind of like right inside my upper thigh, I'm touching myself in a circulate motion. And so kind of talking about that. But what I think is interesting about that is that what it could do for the audience's brain when they're watching it digitally on a computer instead of a live audience around them, because it feels very private. And I think there's something there might be things in people's brain when they're watching in their own home, this very private moment on a computer. It's a whole different style of theater at that point, Yeah. So in terms of those sort of best practices also, I think is respecting, like if I was the actor in that, respecting that I need to set up my own sort of set, right? My own space. It could be if I'm sitting on my chair, that I put a blanket on it because that chair exists in my space afterwards. And so that idea of de-rolling, especially if it's sexually violent in some way, can be really, really shocking. I had a colleague recently at SIUE, they directed it's a long title, but we called it Little Red. And so the actor was looking right at the audience in the camera and was really just a nasty character, right? And a level of intimacy that made you like shocking, or that something violent on stage would have been like maybe shaking or getting up and into her face, this character. Instead, the character licked the camera. And it was like, it was so shocking. And every single one of my students that had seen it for their theater appreciation class, they were like, that was very disturbing, because they felt like they were the one who was being violated. You know what I mean? And so that's part of it too, is like and I thought it was brilliant. It wasn't, but there are these levels of intimacy that we can figure out still, I think. It could be funny things like, if it's a couple and it's supposed to be cute or comedy, like kissing the camera, or things like that, you can still open and close distance, right? And with your camera, it can be, a part of your body that you see, or a blackout, but maybe we hear, like I was using like the idea that people are going to start writing sex scenes in this virtual world. It could be just the sound of a vibrator. Do you know what I mean? And we hear that come on. Breath and pitch and gravity, how we sit. There's still all of these things, like me touching my own body, my own close shapes of like flirting, or wanting to reach out and close distance, and what that looks like. And I think it still requires a choreographer, because it's uncomfortable conversation to have, especially with your scene partner, because you don't ever want to feel like you're the one encouraging it or instigating it, because then you're worried as an actor sometimes, will they think that that I want to make out with them or whatever. And so it's nice to just have that third party there to do that, I think, in a lot of ways. Did that answer the question? I feel like yeah.
I mean, it addressed it. Yes.
It opened it up for a lot more thought, I hope so. Yeah.
Which I will just throw out an aside that if anybody watching has a question or something they're thinking about, feel free to put that in the comments on the Facebook feed. We will be able to see that and address it. Yeah, I haven't done a whole lot of watching theater that was not written for Zoom, translated to Zoom, and I'm using Zoom as a shorthand to any of the virtual
Right.
formats. But I did get the chance to see a production of Mr. Burns, which I'm very familiar with because we did that at RS Theatrics some years ago. And I was very curious to see how that could possibly translate to Zoom. And what I found was I was surprised by, I think for theater, we're used to a lot more suspension of disbelief than when it comes to movies or television. We're asking the audience to assume all sorts of things about settings, and particularly settings are not going to usually be 100% realistic to what we're telling they're looking at. So you would think that then putting it on the screen, you'd have to dial that back and go back in a more realistic direction. But I found myself suspending my disbelief a lot more in watching that than I would have on stage, because things were happening like in this particular production, every actor was in their own home on their own camera. And most of the time they were just talking, but occasionally they would have to interact physically in some sort of way. And it usually manifested as I'm handing the flashlight just off the camera, and then the person receiving it is coming back with a completely different flashlight. And the degree to which that didn't bother me and to which it worked, given the mindset I'm coming in with, I was surprised by. So I think there's a lot of ways we could play with that. With the fact that we're not trying to tell the audience that they are watching a play in real life, in person. We're not. We're all in the same room.
I think so too, and I think that one of the reasons why we're able to suspend our disbelief is because we're so amazed at some of the ideas that come out too, that we love how clever it is. I mean, that I use that as a little fun warm-up game. I say everybody go get a cup. And we introduce ourselves on Zoom, with that game. There are things that instead of focusing on what we can't do, I think we're starting to realize, well, look at what we can do, and what can we do with this, and what does it allow us to do? I think more people are struggling with rights than anything else at this point, and just making sure that they can produce it in this virtual world platform. And what does that mean when you're recording it? Because we care about copyright, because we're good people.
Yes, the original creator needs some compensation.
Yes.
Well. It seems like there must be a whole lot of ways that are we're barely scratching the surface of that we can, when you're thinking about your actions on such a minute, intentional level, that you can use to create that intimacy, even when it's like we're talking right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that I saw a commercial the other day, because with the holidays coming up and they're using this platform to sell stuff and show how sad it is. And even just the Saturday Night Live sketch this weekend, that was a Christmas sketch. If anybody's, I don't know if you saw it, or about telling their parents that they couldn't come home. Yeah. So the way that people use the technology too is funny. So like just seeing them want to touch the baby's hands, and things like that are so moving to me. And I think that there's a lot of space for that here. And that's what I meant when I said, there's still all of these things that I'm dying to play with. And, we are just scratching the surface. So yeah, I'm excited. I think something we have to be aware of, though, kind of moving forward, is that when we do get back into the rehearsal room, I think there are going to be people whose boundaries have changed that maybe weren't expecting that, because we have been so isolated that we joke about, oh, I can't wait. I'm going to, hug my friends and do all this. But I think that we will be surprised how our boundaries have changed, and we have to be really patient with that. And that everybody's boundaries are exactly where they should be. They're exactly right. And I can always tell a story with something different. If the actor isn't comfortable with that. Now, if it's really important to the story and it was on the audition sheet and I realized that I have to tell it that way and they said yes, I'm definitely going to think about it, right? But I may have to replace that actor. But I will work with them again. I will make sure, you know what I mean? And I will want to make sure that we leave in a space where they would want to work with me again. But otherwise, if I would never force, there's so many other options that you can do. And I think that it's those directors who have it in their head of what they absolutely have to have or want that are wrong, not the person with the boundaries.
And that brings me to the next thing I was going to ask about was when we get back, it's very likely it will not be, we're 100% virtual, there's nothing happening physically on stage, and then all of a sudden we can do everything that we were doing before safely. There's probably going to be a transition period where we're looking at things like perhaps even if it's when you're doing something like singing, that's more of a super spreader action, that you may need to be physically distant, or that we may be looking at shows that don't involve a lot of physical intimacy as necessary blocking. How do you see intimacy direction coming in there? Is it going to be a question of adapting tools? Is it going to be using those same tools to close the distance artificially? Or
yeah, maybe it's more stylized at that point. Also, what the intimacy looks like and gesture, and that there is this idea that you've created like what people will know as a kiss on stage, in some way from a distance, and it's very stylized, maybe. That's funny because that's one that I haven't really thought a whole lot about, is like that interim, right? When you're in your circle of your bubble and you're 6 feet away. And so for sure, the distance that you want. But here's the thing. I am also obsessed with the absence of touch, because I think that can mean just as much, right? And so the idea of when you aren't touching somebody and you desperately want to. I mean, think about that play Bent, right? That where the two men have sex between the fence. And so, and they use words and they use their own movement and breath in this way. And I think that that's what we'll see more of. And again, it might not be that it'll be like your Mr. Burns and you'll still have to suspend disbelief, for certain things. But I think that there are going to be really brilliant artists who are going to figure it out. And it's going to be brilliant when you see it, and it's going to excite you and springboard other people in the audience to thinking and scratching the surface again about what is this? Yeah.
Now, do you think this, obviously there have been negative impacts across the board on theater artists coming from this almost complete stoppage of physical productions being produced. Even those who have been able to find virtual work, it's not nearly as plentiful, and the companies don't find it nearly as financially viable for the most part. So I'm sure intimacy directors are feeling that just as much as anyone else. But do you think in terms of the development of the field as a whole, given that it is still very new relative to most things that we're doing in theater, most job descriptions in theater, is this stoppage, is it having an effect on developing the field? Is it giving time to develop and discuss, or is it just sort of causing a complete stoppage in that development?
For me personally, it has been a really good time to study. And so, and I think that's where I'm seeing the most fruitful, opportunities are through the very affordable, affordable, right? Definitely much less expensive than it was, because to go to do workshops, you had to be there in person. It was travel, a 3-day weekend. And now there are several of the different organizations that are providing training like this, where it's going to be available after. So it's been recorded and it's been available. And so you still pay for it. But it is nominal compared. It's very small, very minimal to what it would have been. So I have been taking advantage of that as much as possible. And thinking about and looking, it's hard, like when you're an artist and you're just reading scripts, right? Thinking about what would this be? What would this look like on stage if I were to do this? And so thinking about projects in that way have been fun exciting for me, challenging. And I think that that's one of the ways. I think that it becomes really easy when you are a production company that is doing work and you, like you said, there is no financial, maybe not benefit, but it's certainly not lucrative to do it in this platform. And then to ask an intimacy director to come on is, unheard of, because there's just not that kind of money right now, unless it is a director who really understands the benefit of what they do, or if there was something sort of worked out within the group. But mostly, yeah, I think it's been a really good time to study, and be ready.
Now, I think completely coincidental to anything else happening in 2020, we did see IDI, which Intimacy Directors
International.
Mm-hmm. It's like everybody just says IDI. Yeah. Didn't think until I started talking that I should say what that means, and don't know. So they announced that they were shuttering as an organization in March. Now, plenty of the people involved are still involved in the field as a whole. But in my experience of the discussion, a lot of people were looking to them as the standard bearers of intimacy direction, intimacy choreography, intimacy coordination in the film and TV world. Have you seen effects from that, or is the torch being picked up?
I definitely think, well, first of all, I think, like you said, they're still working, all of them, and doing workshops and different things, just in different formats, and will continue to be the voice. I think that a lot of that particular group, not a lot, that's not fair to say, several of that group are especially focused on film, which is still moving on at this point. And so they are working. I think the organization that I feel very connected to, that I am always following and watching, and I wouldn't say that they necessarily picked it up per se, because they've been doing the work for just as long also, and are all very kind to one another, in the industry, all helping one another, is theatrical intimacy education. And I think that particular group speaks to me as an educator. It's so simplistic for such a large, heady topic. They've broken it down where you can take those tools, or what they call their ingredients, and use it for, again, if you're doing a kid play, right? With little bitty kids, all the way up to you're working with professionals, right? And those tools are so user-friendly that you can look at, read, and they're so giving, because I think that's one of the things as educators is, I was saying earlier, I don't know anyone in the industry who wouldn't at least have the phone, even if you couldn't afford to pay them, and share. But then when you're talking about educators, we are constantly giving away, information and sharing information because we care about, we're passionate about it, and we want it to be better for students. And so while we might not give our time away, for obvious reasons, everybody is very open about, take this, use this, just don't say it's yours. Say, I got this from, or I adapted this from, that's all people ask, is that you share. And I think that's why I respect that particular group so much, was because when I was reading it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is totally some of what I do. I have different names for it. And they say that. They say, we know that there are people have been doing this for a long time. And so let us not focus on certification as much as qualification. And so I think that is one of the things that was really frustrating at the very beginning, as people started to want to do this work, is it was hard to get certified. It still is, I think as it should be, but the industry is changing and moving and developing so quickly too, in terms of what is the best practice. So like if I do fight choreography, there's going to be different organizations, but I'm probably it's if I go to with this fight director and then this fight director, it's not completely different, right? Like, it kind of is sometimes with your intimacy directors and coordinators, depending on what your medium is. And so I find personally that if you are really looking for something that will help you, I would look at theatrical intimacy educators, sorry.
So this, I'm going to ask a couple questions with a slight variation, and the answer might be the same for both. Where, other than just with that organization, where do you think people should start if they're interested in specializing in intimacy direction, choreography, coordination? Is it with taking classes? Is it reading something? Is it reaching out to contact someone?
Yeah, I think the very first thing that you should do is go to, well, you can Google it, right? Like, and see as much information as possible, and find the organization that sort of maybe goes with your philosophy already, as far as your artistic philosophy. Like I said, the reason that I think that I like theatrical intimacy educators so much is because I'm an educator and it speaks to me. And then let's say that's the one that you like the most, right? So their website is very useful. They always post classes. You can subscribe to them. They have a blog, so you can consistently read it. You can email the directors of that site, and they will email you back. And that's what's really cool, because they're teachers. They both are they teach at university. They're very warm, and so they will talk to you. The other thing that's really cool is that Chelsea Pace, I would get this book. This is a new book, and it's awesome, and it has everything in it that will help you. And that's exactly what it says. Is she says, go make it less weird, and she's devoted most of her life to that work that we all have been in various degrees also. And then she says, here it is, and if you're going to use this, just say that that this is where you got it. And you'll try it out, and what works for you works for you. And I think this is where we have to get into what they talk about and what I feel, which is, yes, I'm working toward a certification in this because I think that it's going to be something that's necessary to have for certain people. But I feel like qualification over certification is so much more important. And when you work with actors and they're happy and the director's happy about the work that they've created, and they feel more than happy, they feel good about the work that they've created and without shame, that in itself is a huge endorsement. And that's not to say that we don't make mistakes, in the rehearsal room as we're navigating it, but it's also about owning those mistakes and learning from those mistakes and growing, right? Because there's definitely things that I do now that are different than I even did a year ago, because I've read something and I thought, oh, I'm sort of guilty of that. I need to adjust that, right? And we do it all the time in our language and in different things. And so when it's just that it's growing, it's changing. And so we have to grow and change with it.
And is your advice any different if you aren't looking to make this a major focus of your career? You don't want to take on the title of intimacy director, but maybe you're a director or an actor who just wants to add the most necessary techniques to your tool bag.
Yeah, I think at that point, I think the book would be the most helpful at this point, is to just do the book. And if you then are reading the book and you're confused, you can certainly reach out to me and we can talk, or like I said, she'll answer your email if you email the author. I mean, I feel like we should all be taking classes and still learning. So I don't know that it's really that different. I do know that cost will hinder what we can do, but the book is very affordable. Let's see, how much is the book? I don't know. I got it off of Amazon, and I didn't want to get it off of Amazon, but that's where it was, the fastest to get it, because I was so excited when it came out, and they didn't have it on mylittleBookshop.org yet. I know, I felt so bad saying that to you, of all people.
So I do want to, juggling things here. We are already over our hour. I can never believe how fast that happens. So I do want to mention quickly that RS Theatrics is your host for this evening, and we are still in the middle of our year-end fundraising drive. We are within $155 of our goal for that we wanted to reach by December 15th. So very reachable, and you can help us reach it by following the link that I just dropped in the Facebook comments. We did meet our match donation, so that is no longer in effect, but just that $155 to get us to our year-end goal. I'm also going to drop in the chat Tress's email. Tress, did you want to mention what people might reach out to you for, what you're available for?
Sure. So you can always reach out to me for any intimacy direction or choreography that you would like. We can chat always. I love to hear from secondary educators who are looking for ways to incorporate safe spaces for their students and share that with you. And some exercises that I have that I would love to share with you as well. And I'm always trying to get to know other secondary educators in the St. Louis area since I'm not from here. And one of my jobs is to place teachers that are earning their certification. So I'm looking for cooperating teachers always. You can also reach out to me for any information that you would like to hear about SIUE's program in case there's any students on here as well.
Yeah, one of your overall messages I'm getting is that you don't get into this business if you don't want everyone to have every possible bit of knowledge they could have about it. It's
yes.
And I mean, like, coordinate and not want people to know how to do it right.
No, yeah, I have this really amazing tool that's going to make everybody really healthy emotionally and physically, but I'm going to keep it over here for myself. Yeah, no, we want you. Yeah. And I think, and that's what I mean. I think that that's the beauty of this industry is that it was necessary. And everybody has said, here, try this, you know. And yeah, and I mean, just even answering your question, I know we need to go, but about like, if I was a producer approaching it, one of the things that I didn't even think about was just making sure that everybody understands who they can go to in the room, because it's often not the director. So we didn't even get a chance to really talk about power, although we intimated it when we joked about the German directors, you know, from our study.
And you also need people outside of the room.
Yeah, exactly. But somebody always needs to be watching too. And that, you know, that doesn't change. So if we're actors working on Zoom together in a scene, there should always still be a third eye. And I think that that's something we can kind of forget because we're not in the room together, but that there should always be that ASM, stage manager, director, if, you know, there.
Yes. God, there's so much more we can talk about.
Yeah.
We'll have to set aside another hour at some point.
I would love that. Yeah, I would definitely love that.
So this has been our first 6-week block of While the Ghostlight Burns, and you can find all of the previous chats that we've had on YouTube, on our website, and on our Facebook page. We're so happy everyone's joined us, and look for information about our second programming block coming soon. Until then, be well, everybody. Good night.